talking to you.
Yep. So what is the program
This is
about?
a program for children who could have some fun playing string instruments.
Only string instruments?
String instruments. Violin, viola, cello, and bass. And when they play that combination of instruments in the right numbers, then they can have an orchestra.
How many do you need?
I need about 15 ideally to start with, but I think I'm ready to start with fewer just to get going.
And do you want to begin with violins, or do you want to begin with...
No, I'm going to begin with all of the instruments together, which is what I'm used to doing. And they pick their instruments and they decide, you know, I tell them how many we need of each to make a viable orchestra kind of sound, and then my experience has been that they usually choose the right numbers, and then we start right off as an orchestra from the very beginning.
What sort of music will you play?
Well, it's nice to get stuff that kids enjoy, but what's available is, you know, in method books that we have, it's a combination of newly composed stuff and classical composers and, you know, just fun music for children.
So it's going to be boring classical stuff?
Whatever. It's not boring. Even the children don't think it's boring usually, because it's such an accomplishment to be able to play on these instruments.
So what sort of things would a young person say who's happy playing classical music?
What would they say?
Yep.
This is fun.
Really?
Yeah, they would. We can do this. I can do this. I can't believe I can do this. Or, you know, they need encouragement, but actually they can do some fun stuff from the very beginning. Especially when we do pizzicato, because they find that is a lot of fun, playing, plucking the strings as well.
Instead of using this is just in a violin?
And all the instruments, yeah. Of course, the bass players usually like to pluck because, you know, in rock bands and jazz bands, they mostly just pluck, but they learn to play with the bow and pizzicato also.
And do you have to be big to play the bass?
You have to have a bit of strength, because your hand has to really press hard on those big fat strings. And, you know, it depends the size of bass that we get. We'd probably try and get a bass that would fit the child, but, you know, a bigger and taller child is probably better at it. Has more of an advantage than a tiny little one, but, you know, anything can be done with the right willpower.
Okay, and what are the instruments? There's a violin, the bass,
viola, cello, and bass.
Okay, what's the difference between a violin and a viola?
A viola is a little bit bigger.
And do you play it over your shoulder?
5 notes lower, and it's held the same as a violin.
And the cello, you sit on the chair and...
Yes, and you poke the cello end pin into the floor and play it that way. And the bass you stand, or you sit on a tall stool.
And even with 4 instruments, you can still play good, nice, interesting music.
Absolutely. Because there are books written especially for that, method books written especially for orchestra playing from the beginning.
And is it a quartet, you're thinking?
Well,
no.
It's like a big quartet. The music is actually similar to quartet music or quintet music, because the violins, once you get a little further along, they play 2 separate parts, 2 different parts. So
okay, so it's not an outrageous experiment.
No, no. And actually they can make a nice full sound.
Okay.
Whereas if you just have a violin class, they're all playing the same stuff.
So it sounds like
There's
Suzuki.
no harmony. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that introduction.
You're very welcome.
Okay.
Ooh, you're quite the girl.